This is the Good Government Show.
It was really an opportunity for me to learn more about myself, but also about our nation's history and our ongoing efforts in becoming a more perfect union. When you reduce our ability by way of reduction of staffing and capacity, it's going to put a huge strain on those very resources that make up America's best ideas. And so our nation's greatest conservation president realized and recognized that there's just some places in our nation that definitely need to be set aside. Others are more suitable, others are not. Good government falls on three basic tenets: transparency, accountability, and excellence. Every policy, every budget, every action should withstand public scrutiny.
Tomorrow is July 4th, 2025. On this day before the birthday of our nation's founding, we thought it would be a good day to air my conversation with the former head of the National Park Service. Talking about something that truly makes America great on our nation's birthday, well, that just works. The best idea we ever had. That's how one writer years ago described the National Park Service. Our nation's parks include such diverse sites as the former prison Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay, to the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historic Park in Maryland, and Zion National Park in Utah. On today's show, I talk with David Vela, the former director of the National Park Service. Overall, he spent 38 years in public service and has a lot to say about the current climate for America's national parks. Welcome to the Good Government Show. I'm Dave Martin. First, help us share the message of good government by liking us and sharing us where we are on Facebook, X, YouTube, Instagram, and Blue Sky. Please share our show with your friends and review us where you're listening. And join our Good Government Show community. Check out our website for the link. There are 63 national parks in the U.S. These are some of the most visited and well-known, like Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, Grand Teton, Redwoods, and Glacier, just to name a few. There are national seashores, national monuments, national memorials, and national historic sites, like some of those I've been to, like the Harry Truman House in Independence, Missouri, and Teddy Roosevelt's house, Sagamore Hill, in Oyster Bay, New York. Well, I got to talk to the man who oversees all those sites. David Vela served as a National Park Ranger starting at the age of 19 and ended up as the director of the National Park Service. He had an incredible run through his time with the Park Service, and you're going to hear all about it. He talks about the pride he had in learning about and preserving our nation's parks and our nation's history. He talks about what public service means to him and why it's important. And we talk about why proposed cuts to the Park Service are going to really impact all of us. So coming up, David Vela and a journey through America's national parks. Discover how leading government and education organizations are revolutionizing their operations through cloud-powered transformation. Join Amazon Web Services at AWS Imagine for Education, State, and Local Government in Chicago on July 29th and 30th for an immersive exploration of public sector cloud solutions. Experience hands-on technical demonstrations, participate in over 20 specialized sessions, and collaborate with over 500 industry leaders. Envision what's possible for your organization. Register now at aws.amazon.com/government-education/imagine, and we'll see you in Chicago. What if World War I never happened? What if these three royal cousins, King George of England, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas of Russia, chose peace over pride? Good Government Show executive producer Jim Ludlow has just released a new book. The Royal Cousins is a gripping alternate history that imagines how diplomacy and courage could have stopped a war that took 22 million lives, if only they used the principles of good government. Download The Royal Cousins now on Kindle. It's powerful, timely, and just 99 cents. And all the proceeds support our work here on The Good Government Show. Just search The Royal Cousins on Amazon today. Welcome to the Good Government Show. I am so happy, so excited to have with me David Vela, who's the former director of the National Park Service and the author of a book I just finished reading, Hola, Ranger. Welcome to the Good Government Show.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity. Now, first, I just want to let people know a little bit about your background. 36 years in public service, most of them in the National Park Service. You were the first Latino director of the National Park Service. An incredible history of public service. So thank you for your service. And was it just a blast?
Yeah, it really was. To have the opportunity, one, to be nominated by the president to serve in that capacity, but also the opportunity at a national level to work with some of the most professional, dedicated, passionate public servants that I've ever worked with. It was truly an honor and a blessing.
So I first of all, your book is called Hola Ranger, and you wrote this, Hola Ranger, My Journey Through National Parks. There's a picture of you in your Smokey the Bear hat and outfit on the cover, and just some incredible scenery from the nation's parks behind you. I want to talk first about your very first assignment. This is going to bore a lot of listeners. I don't care. I want to know about it anyway. You lived at Appomattox Court in the actual house where on site where the Civil War ended. You step into that house. What was your first thought?
Yeah, so we lived, my wife and I and our young daughter lived in the home of the district clerk at the time, Mr. Piers. In fact, everything in the house was original.
Yeah.
The flooring and everything else. And after Lee surrendered to Grant, the Confederate forces were paroled and literally stacked their arms on the old Lynchburg-Richmond road, literally right by our house and the white picket fence.
Wow.
And we were I was the supervisory park ranger, in essence, the chief ranger that lived in the village. And I had another ranger that lived a little bit further down. But to be able to walk down those same roads to my office in the historic village was quite the experience. But
were you extremely careful when you're inside the house at all times?
Oh, yeah. Going into the McLean house where the surrender took place. A lot of people, including me, full transparency, when we first pulled up to the park for the first time, I was expecting to go into the courthouse and see a table. Well, Lee sat there and Grant sat there. Didn't happen that way, as you know.
Yeah.
The surrender took place in the village of Appomattox Courthouse in the McLean house. And that story is equally compelling. Wilmer McLean, how he actually witnessed the first shots at Bull Run and basically said, nah, this ain't for us. Moved to Appomattox, and 4 years later, it literally ends in this parlor.
Right.
Fascinating story. But probably like many Americans, I never knew that story. But going into the parlor and seeing that where it happened was quite the experience.
One of the things that shines through in your book, throughout your book, is just the awe and the pride and the quest for knowledge and experience, across all the assignments that you had throughout America. You were in Washington, in New York, in the Grand Tetons, where you served as the director, in Texas, where you worked at one of the only, I guess, Mexican War memorial sites.
Correct. Correct.
Was every day just like, wow, look at me?
Yeah, it really was.
Pinch me, please.
It really started. Yeah, it really started on our first trip to a national park in the late 1960s, 70s, which was Grand Teton. We had never been to a national park, and that sense of exploration really began on that first trip. And as they say, the rest is history. But for some reason, I had this strong desire to learn more about not only myself as an American and as a Latino, but clearly our nation's history. And that started in my first assignment in the missions in San Antonio. We were actually the first permanent staff in the early 80s to open up this new National Historical Park, which is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it really began there, and then to Appomattox. So I learned Spanish colonial history. I learned Civil War history. I learned Revolutionary and colonial history and independence, a National Historical Park, U.S.-Mexican War, and, of course, contemporary history, as well as our natural heritage found in Grand Teton and other places. As a regional director, I had over 66 national parks, to include the Everglades and the Great Smoky Mountains and all the parks in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean. So it was really an opportunity for me to learn more about myself, but also about our nation's history and our ongoing efforts in becoming a more perfect union.
So all of those history classes at Texas A&M didn't exactly pay off because you had more to learn. Is that what I've learned about Texas A&M?
What it did, David, is just kind of whet the appetite. But no, I mean, for me, I always wondered, for example, in the Civil War, what role did my Latino ancestors play? Because there's very little narrative in historical text. And it wasn't until I got to Appomattox and later became a regional director during the sesquicentennial of the Civil War, when we did publications on Hispanics in the Civil War, from battlefield to home front, women in the Civil War, Native Americans, Asian Americans in the Civil War, that I learned so much about my own Latino history and culture. And that's because of the National Park Service and Eastern National, which manages a lot of our bookstores and produces products, national parks east of the Mississippi River.
I want to go back to the beginning. You signed on as a junior ranger, I learned in your book, and one of your first assignments as a junior ranger was working at the DeSoto Memorial in Florida in costume, yes?
Yeah. So it was while I was at Texas A&M, David, and of course we have many seasonal National Park Service employees, which are greatly valued and needed. And one of my professors said, "Hey, Dave, Park Service is looking for Spanish-speaking rangers in Florida. Are you interested?" And I'm going, "Yeah, absolutely." Long story short, we moved. I was 19. David, that was my first oath of office that I pledged allegiance to the Constitution. I was 19 years old. And my job was to dress as a Spanish conquistador and fire period weapons, an arquebus and a crossbow, and cook my food over an open fire as they did. Simple stuff like beans and rice. And I was 19 years old, man. What a blast to be able to get paid,
right?
To do the work we were doing at age 19. But again, that was all part of my learning about my own Latino history and heritage.
And then at one point you stepped out and went to work for Health and Human Services as an investigator, so you got some experience doing that. Yeah. We talked about the fact that you worked at the only Mexican War Museum Park in Texas, and also you presided over the Blue Ridge Parkway. I've probably traveled about 100 miles of the Blue Ridge Parkway, so thank you for that. And Grand Teton, you served as director there. That is the jewel of the Park Service, is it not?
Well, in so many ways, for me, it was so special, David, because that's the first national park I ever saw. And 40 years later, I've become the 21st superintendent of that very first park. As I talk around the country at conferences and in colleges and universities around the country, I talk about all it takes is one experience in a national park. And who knows what that experience will do to you. And for me, and for our two children, and my wife of 45 years, it was life-changing because we raised two kids in our national parks. And that was quite the blessing as well. So it was truly transformative.
And one of your daughters is in the Park Service now? So
our son is a chief ranger in one of our parks in Florida.
Wow. Do you visit often?
Oh, yeah.
Where is he in Florida?
He's in the Everglades.
That's fun. Yeah. Right. Does he take out the airboat?
He's got three boys, and his wife very much spent a lot of time in the parks. And as I did our two children and my wife, he's raising his three boys and his wife in our national parks.
So I want to read this. I want to talk about the parks a little bit. There's a Western writer who is quoted as, "The national parks are, quote, absolutely American and the best idea we ever had."
Absolutely. Wallace Stegner. So true, because they reflect who we are, David, as a nation. They're part of our national birthright. You will remember vividly, when unfortunately 9/11 took place, many Americans went to their national parks, to the Statue of Liberty, to the Liberty Bell, to Independence Hall, to battlefields, to reconnect with those American values that we have as Americans. And it gets to Wallace's point that they're places of reflection where you can go and heal and renew and enjoy the backcountry, enjoy history, and learn more about it. They truly are the essence of who we are as a nation. And I suspect in the 250th anniversary as well, Americans will continue to do that, to reconnect with who we are as Americans and who we are as a nation.
And you can explain this better than I, but I mean, national parks include everything. I'm in New York City. There's a national park in Battery Park, right by Liberty State, right by the Statue of Liberty. There's down in Florida, there's the Everglades. You've got the Grand Tetons, Glacier National Park, Yosemite. There's everything you could imagine in America. There's a national park for that, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, David. And a lot of folks may get confused because, we think of national parks. There are many different designations, but we're all lumped in together, and that's perfectly fine. So you have national seashores, national recreation areas. You have national historical sites, national historical parks. And a lot of people don't know that the White House is a unit of the National Park Service as well. So you have so many different designations that make up the national park system and America's best idea.
I read there's 325 million visitors to national parks and monuments every year that spend almost $26.4 billion in the community and in the region. How big is that?
It's huge. It is, for every dollar that's invested, you get a 12 to 15% return on that investment. Just in Grand Teton and Yellowstone alone, you just take those two parks, which are neighbor parks, $2.2 billion in economic revenue directly to the gateway communities that surround them and in that region. So national parks also, folks know this too, many of the larger national parks have lodges. So they provide goods and services. So they provide employment opportunities within the national parks. The gateway communities, thousands upon thousands of jobs that support that tourism are generated in gateway communities. They're huge economic generators, but also quality of life in the region. And there's so many tangibles and intangibles because national parks exist in the United States.
What's your favorite park?
I was able to get away from answering that question when I was running the Park Service because at that time I had 419 favorite parks. But I can't.
What's your favorite park?
I get away with it anymore.
No, you can't.
And so, David, clearly, I think Grand Teton for me because that park literally changed my life.
If you were going to send somebody to a park and they've never been to a park, where would you tell them to start?
That's a good question. The first thing I'd ask them is, what are you interested in finding out?
Okay.
Are you and here's the thing too, what you may think of a national park is just a cultural site or just a natural site. Actually, there's no such thing. They're combined. You would think that the only U.S.-Mexican war property in the national park system, Palo Alto Battlefield National Historical Park, which I ran, was a cultural historical site. It's a natural site as well. U.S. forces won the first battle because of its natural terrain and how they were able to use the geology to be effective. So that's the first question. What do you want to learn?
Okay.
And the second is, how much time do you have?
All right. The last park I went to is the New River Gorge in West Virginia.
Oh, nice place. Yeah.
And it was cool. They had a driving trail, and you sort of went around the whole thing, and it was a mining trail, and you sort of followed the mining route, to get the coal out. So and it's beautiful, a little high for me, but that's okay. And then I parked my car at one point and did one of the little walks into the woods. So I've been in New River Gorge. Tell folks a park that would surprise them.
Ooh, that's a good question.
Like I live in New York City, and Teddy Roosevelt's birthplace is a national park, and it's a townhouse brownstone in the middle of town. But give me another example. I saved you there for one.
Yeah, you did. Surprising, I would say Independence National Historical Park, which is bigger than just the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall.
Yeah,
you have the First Bank of the United States. You have the Second Bank of the United States. You have Thaddeus Kosciuszko National Memorial, who was, a Polish war hero during the Rev War. It's the smallest unit. His home is there, which is part of the park. Dolly Madison, Todd and Bishop Whitehouse, is there. You have so many historical and cultural icons just in one national historical park. And that's one of those places where you need to have some time to really enjoy.
All right. Well, actually, I'm going to Philadelphia this summer, so I
Awesome.
hope to be able to stop by. As we know, there are cuts that are being faced in the national park system. In fact, you signed a letter with others who addressed it to the new Department of the Interior. I want to read something. It says, additional reductions in funding will further decrease the ability of park managers to effectively manage national parks for the benefit of the American public. What's going on? What are you concerned about?
Yeah. So, David, I was proud to sign along with other former directors and deputy directors, associate directors that worked in headquarters, a bipartisan letter, to the Secretary of the Interior, reminding the Department of the Interior the mandates of the Organic Act. And so there was an edict that basically came out, and I'm paraphrasing, that just talked about the visitor experience, and that should be the predominant use of our resources, ensure that folks have a safe and enjoyable visit and experience. No one disagrees with that. Absolutely no one disagrees with that. But that's only the first tenet in the Organic Act, which created the National Park Service. An equally important tenet are the resources themselves, cultural, natural, historical resources, treasures that are equally important and by law have to be maintained as well. So when you cut archaeologists, when you cut research scientists and biologists and all the ologists that you find not only in the federal government but in the National Park Service, you severely limit the Park Service's ability to protect that component of the Organic Act, which is why the National Park Service was created. So the letter was a reminder that, look, you can't have one without the other.
Right.
And so that's the purpose. But again, I'm proud of the fact that my former colleagues, bipartisan, wanted to remind the Department of the Interior that, look, we were fortunate to play leadership roles for hundreds of combined experience among ourselves. And it's just a reminder of you cannot have one objective without the other.
In your letter, you say a record 331.9 million visitors went to national parks in 2024, an increase of 6.36 million people. I guess they're popular.
Extremely. I mean, Dave, when you look at Grand Teton alone, our season wasn't long because of winter.
Okay.
And we packed over 4 million people, within a 6 to 8 month period. That's a lot of folks. That's the good news. But the challenge is that the impact on the resource itself of why people come. Some examples are, in the backcountry, because there's so many people creating scarring and social trails as they go up towards the Grand Teton, and in the backcountry, litter is another example. And so those types and many other examples really impact the visitor experience as well. So the good news is that the world, although now to a lesser extent, but literally coming to visit our national parks around the country and the territories, but at the same time, the visitor management concerns, the resource degradation of the visitor experience also are some of those impacts. And now when you reduce our ability by way of reduction of staffing and capacity, it's going to put a huge strain on those very resources that make up America's best idea. So there are some serious challenges that our federal public land management agencies are facing, not only the Park Service, but specifically the Park Service. Are
you concerned?
Yes, sir, I am. I'm concerned, but I'm also optimistic. There are the American people who, a lot of people don't know the history of many national parks. It's the American public themselves that said, hey, this place needs to be protected.
Right.
And they would use their financial and their voice and other capacities to inform the administration over many, many decades in the Congress. And so grassroots support, all the different advocacy organizations are playing a very critical role to remind folks about what these impacts are. And to the resource and the visitor experience.
So I saw this recently. Arches National Park in Utah has stopped ranger-led tours. Fossil Beds National Park in Colorado is closed Monday and Tuesday. I think Pinnacle National Park in California had canceled its summer ranger program. Great Smoky Mountains has canceled campground and picnic areas. What does this mean?
It means that, one, that it will also have an impact on, because there's so many and fewer people to, provide for the health and safety of visitors, it could conceivably impact that. Sanitation is clearly a concern. If the restrooms can't be cleaned, that poses a health risk. But also, too, I think it is just, that's not what we're about, in the National Park Service. We want facilities to be accessible. We want them to be clean, properly maintained. When you go to a national park, we hope, as you explained to me earlier, David, we want you to talk to a national park ranger or a volunteer that's trained to help aid in that experience. But if that's not available to you, that directly impacts the quality of that experience. And that's not what we're about. We've never been about that. Now, granted, over the years, yes, we've had, opportunities or sadly, where our budgets just don't meet those high fixed costs. But we still provided as best as we could. Now, when you eliminate the positions and you reduce the budget, the authorized budget of the Park Service in the amount that's being proposed, David, that's not sustainable.
Are we in danger of losing some parks?
There are calls for units of the National Park Service to be given over to states. And I got to tell you, David, I prided myself in working with all segments of government, local, state, and clearly federal community. And I spent a lot of time with our state partners. Many of our state parks around the country really struggle to fund what they are responsible for maintaining and performing. So how can they, with everything they currently have, and they're doing the best that they can, and God bless them for it, how can they maintain a national asset, no matter how small it may be? That's just not feasibly possible. But then also, too, folks, your audience knows this, that national parks are created by Congress. So any decisions to make that happen has to have the involvement of Congress.
Okay. With
the exception of national monuments, which are provided by the president through the Antiquities Act, that's another conversation. But if that were to happen with units of the National Park Service, that's not something that happens overnight. And I frankly cannot see other entities, especially our state partners and friends, absorbing any of that.
There's talk of drilling and mining on public lands, of reducing public lands. What is it? Bears Ears is talked about being shrunk in size. What kind of effect does this have on the park system overall? I mean, there are acres and acres and acres, especially out west, of lots of parkland. Right. If we lose a few acres here and there, does it matter?
Well, there's a lot of federal public land out west. You have other interior agencies, Bureau of Reclamation, Bureau of Land Management, clearly in agriculture, U.S. Forest Service. So there are a lot of federal lands, but they were established for specific reasons. And that's for the use and enjoyment. But also there are opportunities for mining in federal lands. There's some examples, a couple in national parks that are preserves that had original mining activity before they became units of the Park Service, and they've kind of been grandfathered in. But that's a very, very small percentage that takes place. Folks, if they know the history of Grand Canyon National Monument, which Teddy Roosevelt established, Teddy Roosevelt was very clear about mining interests. That's one of the reasons why, he established the monument, later became a national park. And so our nation's greatest conservation president realized and recognized that there's just some places in our nation that definitely need to be set aside. Others are more suitable. Others are not.
You spent 38 years in public service. You probably could have, ducked out at different points in your career and doubled your salary, but you didn't. And you wanted your son to become a national park ranger as well. What kept you in public service all these years?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dave. My parents, who are my greatest role models, my dad passed away 5 years ago. He and his brothers proudly served in the United States Navy. They always impressed upon me and my two younger siblings take on causes greater than yourself. And so for me, after the experience in Grand Teton and seeing that ranger for the first time, getting ready to go on backcountry patrol with a horse and a Winchester rifle, I didn't know what that dude did, but I wanted to learn more, and I had the opportunity to do that. So for me, public service was serving my country in a civilian capacity in the National Park Service, 7 years with the State Attorney General's office as well. So for me, it was just the greatest opportunity to do that, again, to take on causes greater than ourselves. We have 8 grandchildren, and we impress upon our 8 grandchildren that same motto, that you can serve your country in many different ways as a volunteer in the military and in the civilian world. I was blessed to have that opportunity. And now in retirement, Dave, I serve on 7 national nonprofit boards that have a direct and indirect connection to the National Park Service. So I guess you can say that in the last 5 years, I'm still trying to figure out retirement, but try to still be engaged as best as I can.
What are you hearing from those? You said you're a member of 7 boards that still have ties to the National Park Service. What are you hearing from the people in the field?
It's hard for me to put into words, David. Just last week, I was at a national outside festival and summit, and I had a federal employee that was just released. And I got to tell you, David, it was 10 minutes of just raw emotion. And basically she was telling me her story. And she said, Mr. Vela, do you have any advice? And my response was, after I embraced her and told her, a couple of things, I said, look, first of all, thank you for your service. And second, don't give up hope. That there is an army of supporters of like-minded people like myself that understand what you're going through, that are supportive, that are advocating, with Congress for their own members of Congress, that are writing letters of support, that are engaged in these conversations. So you're not in it alone. And especially, David, for some of my former employees that call or send me emails and Dave, what can you tell me? And I can't tell you how many nights I lose sleep because I don't know what else to say other than that you are truly in my thoughts and prayers, and know that there are other people that support you. Stay the course. Don't lose hope. And thank you again for your service.
Describe a typical park ranger. What are they like? What's the average park ranger like? Why do they get into it? What motivates them and draws them into it?
I think it's this passion to serve, David. I think that has a lot to do with it. And also, like me, is to want to learn more about my history and my country through our national parks. And then for me, especially, a lot about my Latino history, which I did at the Soto National Memorial, at San Antonio Missions, at Castillo de San Marcos National Monument in San Agustin, Florida, and at Cesar Chavez and other places, is to want to learn more about our country, want to learn maybe more about their own history and heritage. But I think it's just this commitment to serve and to be part of the federal community. I know those were my motivations. I think my son would say the same thing. But I think at the core, I think those are the principles of folks wanting to be biologists and archaeologists and facilities managers, et cetera, in National Park Service.
One of the things that I read in your book was you looked at who was attending and who was coming to the national parks, and you tried to open that up to different people, different walks of Americans that not necessarily are regular visitors to the national parks, and also park rangers, park employees. It looks like you tried to open that up as well. Were you successful? Do you feel like you made an impact there?
I think that the Park Service, I look at former Director Hartzog was one of my champions. He was the one, David, that brought in urban areas into the national park system. And one of the reasons why is because that's where the people are.
Okay.
And you mentioned earlier your own personal experiences in New York City. That's one of the examples. So many of my predecessors, thought about how do we embrace the nation and add to the national park system. That's one example. But for me personally, it was wanting to make sure that every American had the opportunity to know what I did, wanted to have a chance to work in places like this. And so many folks before me championed those causes. And what we did is we took those best ideas and developed coalition support inside and outside the Park Service and tried to move the needle. An example you may remember in my book was George Melendez Wright. George Melendez Wright was the first Latino chief biologist in the National Park Service. I think it's chapter 1 or 2 of my book.
Yeah.
And the reason why I wanted to start it there was he influenced me. And his science, David, still applies today. And he funded much of the science that he generated out of his own pocket. Science such as, hey, it may not be a good idea to feed grizzly bears, and guess what? That's the tenet for our, much of our bear science today. They need the natural environment. They don't need to be, looking at humans as a potential food source and being fed. That was him and the work of those that he worked with. But he was Latino. And so for me too, I want to talk about the George Melendez Wrights and the Native American champions like Gerard Baker, who was featured on Ken Burns's America's Best Idea, who's one of the champions in the Park Service, and his brother Page. They were both superintendents. Gerard was superintendent of Mount Rushmore, so that our indigenous brothers and sisters can say, hey, these are your champions in the Park Service. You want to be like them and know that there are opportunities to do that. So, yes, I think collectively we were able to move the needle. We still have a ways to go in the Park Service. But I think my concern today, David, is that based on recent executive orders, if we're only able to share one narrative and not multiple narratives, that may limit our ability to ensure that there's equal opportunity, equal access to not only the storytelling, but for the opportunity to tell the stories in our nation's national parks.
What would you tell someone who wanted to become a park ranger or wanted to get into the National Park Service or even into federal government? What would you tell them today?
Yeah, I had that conversation probably hundreds of times over, my career in the Park Service. It was much more difficult, David, when we began, back in the 70s. For every one vacancy, there were probably 300, 400, 500 applicants.
Yeah.
There's not as many today. It's just the timing of it. It just took time. And so during that time, many of us, like me, we became seasonal park rangers, or you would volunteer to get, that experience and make yourself marketable. That was the way we used to do it. Now those positions are cut, not only in the Park Service, but across the federal government. And administrations have that right. Don't get me wrong. They have that right to make those decisions. But the question I'm being asked today is, Dave, should I waste my time pursuing a federal job right now? My response is, do your homework. Do your homework. And what I'm hearing too is that the personnel policies may be changing as well. And so keep your options open. I would never tell anyone, don't look at the federal government. Because that would be disingenuous of me, because my life was the federal government. But my advice is, do your homework. Where do you want to work? And keep all your options open. But most importantly, make yourself marketable for those opportunities.
All right. Well, good advice. That was the easy part. Coming up, we're going to ask you the hard questions about working in government. Are you ready? Start preparing.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. The Good Government Show is sponsored by Our. That's OUR for Our Community. Get involved. We hear that all the time from government leaders. Our co-brands with your government's name and logo. Your staff and the people you serve are connected and part of your community. From any device, your members provide reliable data and meaningful feedback. Ask a question like, do we want more parkland or better homeless services? More engaged conversations come through the Our app. Visit Ourco, that's OURCO.com, and book a demonstration. Once you wrap up this episode of The Good Government Show, give a listen to our friends over at Good News for Lefties. This daily podcast highlights news stories that show there's more good news out there. Other people in government are really trying to do the right thing. That's Good News for Lefties. Listen where you're listening now. So we have our Good Government Show questionnaire, which I often ask of people in elected offices, but this will be an interesting take, talking to the former director of the National Park Service. Define good government.
Well, for me, and David, not only did I work in state government and federal government, but I was also a two-term local elected official. So I had a run in politics. So for me, good government falls on three basic tenets: transparency, accountability, and excellence.
Excellence. That can't be easy.
Yeah, excellence for me is if what you're looking at, whether it's a policy statement or a directive, is not working, and you can define what success is, then you change it to make sure that it works. Because every policy, every budget, every action should withstand public scrutiny. And if it doesn't, you need to reassess. The challenge that I've seen, David, in my career at 38 years in public services, that didn't always happen. Some folks had this attitude, well, I'm the policymaker, and so this is the way it's going to work. That's not a good attitude to have. But if you constantly keep an open mind and you continue to assess that, then your probability of success increases because you have an open mind and you're listening.
So if people want to support national parks and the National Park Service and want to fight the 30% cut in the budget that's being proposed, what should they do?
Absolutely. And we spoke about this at the conference last week, is use your voice. I truly believe and have been a local elected official. Politics are local. And you hear that all the time, but I've seen that firsthand. That includes everything from policy development. When we have environmental assessments or environmental impact statements, there is a required community engagement, and that community could be the nation, where you get public input. And many times you may be thinking about a certain perspective, and then you hear multiple perspectives that maybe you didn't think about, or maybe it validates what you were thinking about as you had these public meetings. So whether it's policy, whether it's budget, getting hold of your local elected officials starts there, and then your members of Congress who have the ultimate say on the president's budget. But it's powerful when you get, your local elected officials, your state officials, discussing these interests with your members of Congress, and they speak with a unified voice. That's a pretty powerful narrative.
So you talked about the fact that you ran for office. What made you decide that your goal was actually to be the director of the National Park Service, not president of the United States?
It wasn't by design. It really wasn't by design. Or
governor of Texas. I don't know where you were aiming.
I mentioned earlier about seeing that ranger, law enforcement ranger, getting ready to go on backcountry patrol. Dave, that's all I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I was blessed to have that opportunity, put on that weapon and to serve and protect. But then there was an opportunity to be a division chief. And then there was an opportunity to be a superintendent. I'm like, okay, that's it. Okay, superintendent, well, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm running a national park. But then there was an opportunity to be a regional director running 66 national parks. I'm like, no, man, I can't do that. I like what I'm doing. When I left to go back to Washington, when I was running President Johnson's ranch in the hill country of Texas and working directly with Lady Bird Johnson, it's like, why would I want to leave that to move up the chain of command?
For a Texas boy, why would I leave Texas? The rest of the country's no good. Texas. I'm in Texas. Leave me alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at home eating barbecue. But that one opportunity opened another door. And frankly, when we got the gig in Grand Teton, I remember telling my wife, all right, babe, that's it. Hey, we're back where we started.
Yeah.
Why we want to leave this until Washington calls and said, Secretary of the Interior wants to talk to you. And then you go, and then the rest is, what we talked about. So never had any intention of running the National Park Service. All I wanted to do was to be that law enforcement ranger, but doors of opportunity open. And you have to decide, in this case, with my wife of 45 years, whether we're going to walk through that door. And I'm glad we walked through that door together. and it was an experience of a lifetime.
Did you always see yourself working in public service? And did you at one point like get a business degree or think you'd be
I actually
a reporter?
Did. Yeah, and I think it mainly was more because of my dad, his service in the Navy. I was really two options. I was interested and maybe being in the shore patrol in the United States Navy, kind of following in my dad's footsteps and my uncle's.
Okay.
Till we made that trip to Grand Teton and then Yellowstone, and that changed it.
Wow. All right. No Navy, huh?
No Navy.
What would you like people to know about the National Park Service they probably don't know?
That you can live and work in these special places and learn something about yourself. Not only what it is to be an American, but yourself. You can do genealogy in national parks. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was at Appomattox Courthouse, we in the actual courthouse itself, we maintained all the parole records, David, of the Confederate forces that were paroled.
Everybody who was there for
everyone that was there
had to write their name down on the list.
Absolutely, that was paroled after the surrender terms were signed. We had them in books, and many times folks would come up to the front desk, and I'd be there at the front desk, and they'd say, Ranger, I think my ancestors were here. And I said, oh, okay. Well, what state were you from? Do you happen to know what unit they were from? And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. I said, okay, let's work on the last name. David, probably 8 times out of 10, we find their ancestor there.
Wow. And did you actually pull out the actual book and show them?
A compilation of those that were paroled. We'd make a copy of it.
Yeah.
And we'd say, your ancestor was here. And we'd give them a copy of it.
Wow.
Can you imagine the emotional experience that they had? That they were on the very grounds that their ancestors were that fought during the Civil War.
North and South.
It was powerful. That's what it's like. So, and you mentioned earlier too, your experience with a ranger of how they made that connection right with you. And I think a lot of it goes into, hey, I want to share with you what I know as a ranger, but I also want you to continue doing your research.
Right.
And so it's that human connection that folks in the Park Service really enjoy. As I did, I'll never forget that experience. Or when someone comes into, as they did in the missions in San Antonio, which are active parishes, and many of the descendants still live in that community, when you would talk to them, they would say, oh, I didn't know that. Man, that is like someone giving you $100 bill when you're able to make that connection for them. And they walk away saying, man, I'm glad I came. You can't put a price tag on that. I had many experiences like that.
I don't know how you're going to answer this question, but I ask this question of elected officials. What was the best part of your job?
The best part of my job was just knowing that I represented, whether you voted for me or not, because I actually was in an at-large district. Whether you voted for me or not, I had the opportunity to represent you. And as a result, I was a school board trustee, elected 2 terms. My first election, I won by 20 votes.
Okay.
20 votes. The second election, I ran unopposed. But I would get phone calls at 10 o'clock at night saying, hey, Dave, my water got cut off, and my electric bill, I've got some issues. And I'd say, well, that's a city issue, and that's a city council person's job. But I tell you what, let me make some phone calls for you. It had nothing to do with being a school board trustee. I enjoy doing that. That's public service.
What are you concerned about, especially now? What are you concerned about with the national parks?
I'm concerned that we are losing institutional knowledge by a result of the over 1,000 employees that are no longer with us at every level of the organization, especially at the senior executive level. As a senior executive, Dave, we're all apolitical. And this is the other thing I talk about a lot in the book, is that, you can have political passions as I do, but when you walk into that office, you leave it in the car.
Okay.
It's about public service. And so the institutional knowledge that no longer there at every level, headquarters, regional offices, and at the parks, folks are retiring. They took the fork in the road option, and they're no longer there. So the institutional knowledge we're losing. Secondly, I'm concerned about the fact that the Park Service is not able to fill positions right now. I'm concerned about the narrative about you can only talk about these narratives, but you can't talk about these other narratives, which are equally important and of value. I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about the potential degradation of the very resources for which the Park Service is entrusted to protect. I'm concerned about the quality of the visitor experience now, because you're not going to have folks that will be able to talk to you as we used to. Now, granted, we had budget problems before and challenges, but even more so today. So there are a number of concerns. I'm also concerned too that, frankly, the international travel numbers are dropping. And I say that because we learned so much from those international visitors. I remember at Grand Teton, we had, before COVID, David, huge visitation from Asia. And we learned some valuable lessons. And one of those lessons is we had a bus, as an example, that today I couldn't tell you whether they were coming to Yellowstone or leaving Yellowstone or vice versa. Anyway, long story short, the bus overturned.
Oh.
Not one person in that bus spoke Mandarin, spoke English. They all spoke Mandarin, including the driver. Of the hundreds of employees that I had, I didn't have a single ranger that spoke Mandarin, with the exception of the spouse. And so, lights and sirens, we were taking folks to the hospital because she spoke the language. She was able to communicate with the doctors and more than likely save lives. So the moral of that story was we learned a valuable lesson, that our materials, that our ability to at least understand the cultures that are coming, if not the language, is important. And so we learned a valuable lesson. So not only you're starting to see that reduction in world travel, but also too, you hire employees not only to reflect the nation, languages, cultures, and understanding of those communities, but the world as well. And you're not going to have that ability because of the cuts, and to be able to provide for those that come domestically and internationally. So I think it's a series of concerns that I have. Frankly, it does keep me up at night when I hear these stories directly from my former colleagues. But I also am optimistic that through the voice of the American people, that it will resonate, and folks will better understand in positions of decision making what those impacts are.
So I know that national parks have lodges, and you can stay in a lodge on the park. What is your favorite lodge to go to? If you were going to take me and go, David, we're going to the park. Here's where we're going to go. We're going to stay at this lodge. And when we're there, what's the thing we have to have, the best local dish out there?
Well, for me, Grand Teton was staying in the superintendent's residence.
All right. Well, I don't think I can stay there. So where else can I go?
No, that's not open to the public.
All right.
I'm not kidding, man. Every view in our room, in our house, had a view of the Grand Teton. I mean, it was spectacular. I mean, there's so many. I've stayed. In Grand Canyon, I stayed there. I didn't stay in the lodges, of course, in Grand Teton, but spent a lot of time in it. I will tell you that any lodge that you go to the national park, the concession community, they're rock stars. I mean, they own the stewardship narrative. And so they will make it and their employees a quality visitor experience. Truthfully, I've only stayed in just a couple in Grand Canyon. But I would encourage, any lodge, they take pride in what they do. And we're very much a part of the visitor experience. So my only two experiences were in Grand Canyon, and they were both great.
All right. And what do we have in Grand Canyon? What's the dish there? What's the local thing?
Well, you have the ones on the South Rim. Yeah, every one of them on the South Rim. I would recommend. Names escape me right now, but right. Because it's been decades since I stayed there. But any of them on the South Rim. And frankly, in any national park, they're quality experiences, and they were phenomenal partners.
And you're in Texas. I'm going to ask you the question: You're going out for a meal. You having Tex-Mex or barbecue?
Man, that's close, dude. Because in Texas, they're synonymous. It was the vaqueros. The Mexican, cowboys that created the barbecue tradition. So there's kind of some similarities there.
All right. Okay.
It really depends
I
on
will
the
make
day.
you pick then.
Yeah. Probably our first priority, probably Mexican food.
All right. Okay.
Followed shortly by Texas barbecue.
Followed shortly by Texas barbecue. Tell me something about the National Park Service and the work that goes on there that people don't know about, that they would be surprised to hear about.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There are a lot of national program offices that folks will never see, but they will experience. For example, the National Register program is to help identify, with partners of interest, historical places and sites, landmarks. There's a Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program, which help communities build capacity. For example, take old railroad lines and help convert them into pathways and for use and enjoyment. You have cultural historical programs and other programs that provide technical advice to communities of interest, governments, as an example, and the National Affairs Office that works with with our treaty obligations with foreign countries. That the American public may not know about, but it's a critical role to share America's best idea with the world. And so there are many, many examples of folks, but sadly, David, those offices have also been hit very hard as well.
All right. Well, this is the Good Government Show. We like to end this on an up note. Give me an example of some good government program that you were able to move forward when you were National Parks Director.
Yeah, I think that during Trump, which is when I was running the Park Service, President Trump and Congress passed the Great American Outdoors Act, which is critical, which David helped to address billions of dollars in deferred maintenance and related programs. As a result of that, that's one law that continues to provide benefits to national parks. I think. Our national youth program is extremely important to help inspire and promote the next generation workforce, but also advocates in what we do in the National Park Service. But I think for me, it's just the takeaway that I have is the love by the American people of their national parks. I think that helped to sustain us, folks on the front lines. Sadly, I had folks on the front lines that died in the line of duty, serving and protecting, that were injured severely in the line of duty, serving and protecting America's best idea. The love of the National Park Service by the American people is something that I will never take for granted, but will always recognize and appreciate, having worked in the National Park Service.
David Vela, the former director of the National Park Service, America's Best Idea, and the author of Hola Ranger. It has been a pleasure talking with you. And I would just say to anybody, if you're thinking about getting into public service, if you're thinking about working with the Park Service, if you're thinking about working for the federal government and you want to be inspired, pick up a copy of Hola Ranger. There'll be a link on our website. Just an incredible experience reading it and reading about your experience. Thank you so much, and good luck. And please keep an eye on our national parks. We need you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. County government affects more people than any other form of government. That's why we like talking to so many representatives of county government here on the Good Government Show. They are the voice of public service. The National Association of Counties, or NACo, supports all 3,069 counties across the USA. This year, their annual conference is in Philadelphia in July. Plan to attend the conference and join them in their efforts to bring good government to America's counties. Check out the details at NACo.org. That's NACo.org. After you get done with this episode, hear more good government stories with our friends at How to Really Run a City. Former mayors Kasim Reed of Atlanta and Michael Nutter of Philadelphia, and their co-host, journalist and author Larry Platt, talk with guests and other mayors about how to really get stuff done in cities around the nation. Check them out where you're listening now or through their nonprofit news site, thephiladelphiacitizen.org/podcasts. Imagine looking out any window in your house and seeing the beauty of Grand Teton, or walking past the house where the Civil War ended on the way to your house, an 1850s-era home inside the town of Appomattox Courthouse, the entire town a National Historic Park where you're the head ranger. Just an incredible career and a career of amazing experiences. With budget cuts to the National Park Service looming, I hope the people advocating for cuts heard what David said and what he and his fellow senior Parks Department officials had to say. And David said what so many others in government say: get involved, raise your voice, speak up for America's parks. They're clearly, as David I think showed, as a nation, the best idea we ever had. Now, go make plans to visit a national park. Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. Please like us and share us with your friends and review us right here where you're listening. And check out our website, goodgovernmentshow.com, for extras. Help us keep telling stories of good government in action everywhere. And join us again for another episode right here. I'm Dave Martin, and this is The Good Government Show. The Good Government Show is a Valley Park production. Jim Ludlow, Dave Martin, that's me, and David Snyder are the executive producers. Our show is edited and produced by Jason Stershic. Please subscribe, then share us, and like us and review us. That's the best way to make sure we're able to keep telling these stories of our government working for all of us. Then listen to the next episode of The Good Government Show.